영어로 듣는 아담 스미스의 국부론과 그의 생애.
Hello everyone. Today, we're going to dive into one of the most consequential books in history, Adam Smith's An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations, published in 1776, and the Life of Adam Smith. Often simply called The Wealth of Nations, this text laid the intellectual foundation for modern economics and the concept of free market capitalism. Smith was a Scottish moral philosopher, not an economist in the modern sense, and his work is profoundly rooted in moral philosophy, arguing that self-interest, when channeled correctly, can lead to public good. Our presentation will cover the book's three major pillars: the division of labor, the invisible hand, and Smith's critique of mercantilism. Part 1. The engine of prosperity, the division of labor. Smith begins his magnum opus by addressing the central question: what causes the wealth of a nation? His immediate and primary answer is the division of labor or specialization. The pin factory example. Smith famously opens the book with the example of a pin factory. He observes that an unskilled laborer working alone could perhaps make only 1 pin a day, maybe 20 at most. However, when the process is broken down into approximately 18 distinct operations, one person drawing the wire, another straightening it, a third cutting it, a fourth sharpening the point, and so on, the productivity skyrockets. 10 specialized workers, performing only their single task, could collectively produce over 48,000 pins per day. This means each worker's output increased by thousands of times due to specialization. 3 benefits of specialization. Smith identified 3 key benefits that drive the massive increase in productivity. Increase in dexterity. By constantly repeating the same simple task, a worker's skill or dexterity at that specific job increases dramatically. Saving time. Less time is wasted moving from one type of work to another or changing tools and workstations. Encouragement of machinery. Simplifying a task makes it easier to invent machines to automate or assist that specific simple step. This is the origin of technological innovation. The extent of the market. Smith notes a crucial caveat: the division of labor is limited by the extent of the market. If the market, the number of buyers, is too small, there's no incentive for producers to specialize, as they couldn't sell their surplus goods. Therefore, free trade and larger markets are essential to promote specialization and maximize national wealth. Part 2. The guiding mechanism, the invisible hand. Having established that specialization is the engine of wealth, Smith moves to the mechanism that organizes this complex system: the invisible hand. Self-interest as a public good. Smith fundamentally believed that human nature is driven by self-interest and a desire to better our own condition. This is not a moral failing. Rather, it is the fundamental force that guides the economy. When a butcher sells meat, he doesn't do so out of benevolence. He does it to earn money. When a consumer buys meat, they don't buy it to reward the butcher. They buy it because they want meat. Both parties, driven by self-interest, satisfy the needs of the other. Smith writes, "It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest." The invisible hand explained. The invisible hand is the metaphor Smith uses to describe the mechanism by which individual self-interest, in a competitive market, unintentionally benefits society as a whole. When individuals pursue their own profits, they must produce goods or services that others want, at a price others are willing to pay. A businessman, intending only his own security and gain, is led by an invisible hand to promote an end which was no part of his intention. This competition ensures that resources flow efficiently to where they are most needed and that prices are kept low, maximizing the total output and welfare of the nation. The role of government. For the invisible hand to work effectively, Smith outlined a minimal, yet critical, role for the government, often called the laissez-faire doctrine, meaning, let them do. Defense. Protecting the society from violence and invasion. Justice. Establishing an exact administration of justice, rule of law, to protect property rights and enforce contracts. Public works. Erecting and maintaining certain public works and institutions, like roads, bridges, and public education, that private individuals would not find profitable to maintain. Part 3. The Critique of Mercantilism. Smith's book was primarily written as a direct attack on the prevailing economic theory of the time, mercantilism. The flaws of mercantilism. Mercantilism was the belief that a nation's wealth was measured by its accumulated gold and silver, its treasure. This led to policies focused on maximizing exports and minimizing imports through tariffs and subsidies. Smith meticulously dismantled mercantilism, arguing that it was a fundamentally flawed and restrictive system. Wealth is not gold. Smith argued that a nation's true wealth is the annual produce of the land and labor of the society, the totality of goods and services produced. Gold is merely a medium of exchange. It doesn't feed people or build houses. The zero-sum game. Fallacy. Mercantilists viewed international trade as a zero-sum game. One nation's gain was necessarily another's loss. Smith showed that trade is a positive-sum game where both trading partners can benefit. The case for free trade. Smith introduced the concept of absolute advantage. If one nation can produce a good more efficiently than another, both nations benefit by specializing in what they do best and freely trading the rest. Tariffs and quotas are not helpful. They merely redirect capital into less productive domestic industries. The wages of labor and the value theory. Smith spent considerable time analyzing the forces that determine prices and wages. Labor theory of value. Smith suggested that the ultimate value of any commodity is determined by the amount of labor required to produce it, though this was later refined by other economists. Wages and the standard of living. Unlike his predecessors who favored keeping wages low, Smith argued that high wages were a sign of a prosperous nation and made workers more productive. He believed competition among laborers prevented wages from rising too high, but competition among employers drove wages toward a subsistence level that allowed the worker to maintain his family. Conclusion: the legacy of the wealth of nations. The wealth of nations provided the moral justification for the Industrial Revolution and the capitalist system that followed. It successfully shifted economic thought from the accumulation of treasure to the creation of goods and services through labor and specialization. To summarize, Adam Smith's revolutionary contribution was the realization that prosperity is driven by specialization, the division of labor. Order is maintained by self-interest, the invisible hand. Growth is achieved by free markets, the rejection of mercantilism. Smith's work remains the bedrock of modern economics. It is a powerful argument for liberty, economic liberty, and a profound testament to the idea that by freeing individuals to pursue their own interests, nations can, perhaps ironically, achieve the greatest common good. The life story of Adam Smith, the father of modern economics. Adam Smith, 1723 to 1790, was the Scottish moral philosopher whose monumental work, The Wealth of Nations, fundamentally changed the world's understanding of economic systems. To understand his economics, we must first understand his intellectual journey. 1. Early life and education 1723-1740. Adam Smith was born in 1723 in Kirkcaldy, Scotland, a small fishing and mining town. His father, also Adam Smith, was a customs controller and died before Smith was born, leaving him to be raised primarily by his strong and supportive mother, Margaret Douglas. This maternal influence remained central throughout his life. Smith was a precocious child. At the incredibly young age of 14, he entered the University of Glasgow. At the university, he studied under the influential philosopher Francis Hutcheson, who introduced him to ideas concerning natural liberty and the moral sense. Hutcheson's lectures greatly shaped Smith's early moral philosophy. After Glasgow, Smith received a prestigious scholarship to study at Balliol College, Oxford, from 1740 to 1746. Smith found the teaching there stifling and inferior to the intellectual environment in Scotland. Despite this, he utilized the time to read extensively in the university's large libraries, particularly in French and English literature and ancient classics. 2. The formative years, Glasgow and moral philosophy, 1748 to 1764. Upon returning to Scotland, Smith gave a series of public lectures in Edinburgh on rhetoric and polite literature, which quickly gained attention. This led to his appointment, first as professor of logic, and then, in 1752, as professor of moral philosophy at the University of Glasgow, the very position once held by his mentor Hutcheson. Smith's years at Glasgow were arguably the most productive and happiest of his career. He taught a wide range of subjects that formed a complete system of social thought, including ethics, jurisprudence, police, governance, and revenue. In 1759, he published his first major work, The Theory of Moral Sentiments. This book explored how human morality develops through sympathy and imagination, introducing the concept of the impartial spectator, an inner judge that helps individuals moderate their passions and judge the morality of their actions. Crucially, the theory of moral sentiments provided the philosophical framework for his later economic ideas. It established that even self-interested individuals are constrained and guided by social sentiments and moral constraints, ensuring that self-interest does not devolve into pure avarice. 3. The Grand Tour and the Birth of the Wealth of Nations, 1764-1776. In 1764, Smith resigned his professorship to accept a highly lucrative post as tutor to the young Henry Scott, the Duke of Buccleuch. This position offered him the chance to travel across Europe on a grand tour. This 2-year period was critical. In France, Smith met with the leading intellectual figures of the time, including Voltaire and the French economists known as the physiocrats, most notably Francois Quesnay. The physiocrats, who argued that wealth derived solely from land, sparked Smith's thinking on the true source of wealth. Upon returning to Kirkcaldy in 1766, Smith spent the next decade in semi-seclusion, dedicating himself entirely to writing his masterpiece. He methodically analyzed economic history, government policies, and trade practices. The result was the publication of an inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations in 1776, the same year as the American Declaration of Independence. 4. The Legacy of the Wealth of Nations. In later life, 1776 to 1790, The Wealth of Nations was a revolutionary work. It challenged the prevailing mercantilist view that national wealth was measured by gold, arguing instead that true wealth came from the annual produce of labor, what we now call the gross domestic product. The book was an immediate success and quickly established Smith as the leading economic thinker of his age. In his later years, Smith served as the Commissioner of Customs in Scotland, a role that provided him with a comfortable income and access to the economic data he loved to analyze. He also spent time revising both The Theory of Moral Sentiments and The Wealth of Nations. Adam Smith passed away in Edinburgh in 1790 at the age of 67. He instructed that most of his unpublished papers be destroyed, leaving us with his 2 published masterpieces, and a legend of dedication to scholarship. Conclusion. Adam Smith was more than just the father of economics. He was a moral philosopher who saw the economic sphere as part of a larger, coherent system of human behavior. His genius lay in synthesizing moral behavior and economic incentives into a single, cohesive framework, the free market, which continues to shape global economic policy today.
The end. Thank you for joining us.